Tony, are you on?
Yes, sir. Start now.
Okay, no problem. I don't know what caused that. I was just on.
Yeah. Don't know either. All right, we're getting ready to go.
Okay, well, just a minute. We got to. Don't we have California ASCD people who need to be on too?
No, that was last week. This is a national.
Okay.
This
right.
is just you.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm starting now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my sincere apologies. Evidently, we have found a very busy time for GoToWebinar. Both Doug and I were delayed in logging on. My name is Tony Flock with Creative Leadership Solutions, and we both deeply empathize with the challenges that you all have faced recently with remote learning. So as we begin, just a couple quick notes, and then I will quickly turn it over to Doug. All participants are muted due to the size of the audience. We certainly welcome and encourage your questions, comments, and insights throughout the webinar. So please use the question or chat features to interact with us. We will also pause periodically for a couple of activities using Poll Everywhere, so please have your cell phone handy, but also to respond to your questions. And today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website for download. So without further ado, I'd like to turn you over to Dr. Douglas Reeves, the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions. He is the author of more than 40 books and 100 articles on education, leadership, and student achievement. Doug and the Creative Leadership team are providing free webinars for teachers, leaders, parents, and students around the world. Doug.
Well, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us. We have people from around the country and around the world all interested in how we can best take next steps in this interesting technological environment in which we find ourselves. Every day I'm hearing examples of great practices, and I hope you'll contribute to those as well as we make this very interactive, even though we have hundreds of people participating. You can stop anytime with questions and challenges. I want you to know that this is a safe and appropriate way to make challenges. If you disagree with me, I know I learned from that, and your colleagues will as well. Divergent thinking helps us grow. Also, represent the people who aren't here. You may be thinking of a parent or a student or a colleague who is not on this webinar. Their ideas are equally important. You can use the question or chat function, and as Tony said, we'll also have the opportunity for some interactive videos and interactive polling functions as well. Also, I've deliberately made my personal contact information available. You'll see on the download that there are a couple of handouts that you have. You'll find not only my email, but my personal text message there, and I answer every one of those personally. You're not going to get any intermediary, no bots involved, just me. So be patient with me, but you ask a question, I promise you'll get a straight answer. Next slide.
And we're actually going to dive straight into one of the aforementioned polling activities. So ladies and gentlemen, if you would please take out your cell phone and send a text to recipient 22333. Type the message Creative Lead 764 as you see there on the screen. Once you've joined, you should receive a response indicating that you have joined Creative Leadership's poll. And in just a moment, as we give everybody an opportunity to do that, we will introduce the question. So again, text to recipient 22333, type the message Creative Lead 764, hit send. You should receive a confirmation that you've joined the poll. And we will transition to the question now. So first thing, we'd love to hear from you. What are your greatest concerns about teaching and learning in a virtual environment in which we've all found ourselves right now? Please use one word to reply to that poll.
We'll give you about 60 seconds. About 20 more seconds, please. And let's come back to large group. Thank you very much for your participation there. And obviously, equity and engagement are the two big topics in your mind, though many others are important as well. I promise you that we'll get to those two issues in detail, because as those of you who know me know that equity is not only what I've committed my life and career to, but also the subject of my most recent book, Equity and Excellence, published in 2020. And so I'll make sure that we get to those twin issues of equity and engagement this afternoon. So next slide, please. Tony, next slide. There we go. One of the things that we're offering to you is grief support groups. I hope you don't need them, but unfortunately more and more people do. My colleague, Dr. David Gleason, who's an internationally known adolescent psychologist, is providing free grief support groups to adolescents. You can reach us at service@creativeleadership.net. David has a splendid book called At What Cost about the emotional development of adolescents. I really recommend it. And David, personally, you will find to be an empathetic, thoughtful, and extraordinary professional. For those of you who want to engage in some writing, we host a free writer's workshop first Saturday of every month. Virtually, it's at Marsh Writers, that's M-A-R-S-H, marshwriters.org. People are writing memoirs, poetry, screenplay, fiction, nonfiction, many different ways to respond to how they're feeling right now, and you get supportive interaction from other writers. And of course, leadership support, which I provide personally along with my colleagues. My email is up there, douglas.reeves@creativeleadership.net. I want to make sure that we're supporting you both at a policy level and leadership level, whether it's district, state, or national leadership issues. Next slide.
Bit of a lag. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're actually transitioning to a second poll. I'm hopeful that you see those directions on the screen here. All right. So again, if you did not get an opportunity to join that first poll, please send a text to recipient 22333. The message that you should send to that recipient is Creative Lead 764. If you've already joined, you do not need to resend. And our question will be coming up for you on the screen, hopefully momentarily here. So we'd like you to consider which of three scenarios are likely to happen as we move into this new school year. And they will display for you in just a moment, but to give you a heads up, actually, Doug, they should be up. So if you'd like to elaborate on those scenarios.
We can invent dozens of scenarios, but these are the three big ones that we're basically going to be open for business for our offices in July and for our schools in September. Secondly, that we'll open our schools, but there's going to be continued social distancing and probably split shifts. Or C, that we're still going to be closed and struggling with, just as we are right now, with how things are. So take again about 30 seconds and let us know your prediction of option A, B, or C based on your best assessment of where your schools are.
And as those are rolling in, Doug, we've also received one additional comment through the question feature choosing option C. And an option B.
About 15 more seconds, please.
I think we have a clear winner.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see very many people expecting things to be open for business as usual on July 1st, but God willing, a lot of us will at least have schools with some physical presence. But that means all the more that we're going to have to make use of the lessons learned of this past spring, because we're still going to be applying them in the fall if your predictions are true. Obviously, close to 90% of you feel that we're going to either be partially open or not open at all in the future. Next slide, please.
And it is loading. Again, apologize for the delays, but core competencies for equity and excellence. There we go.
So there's some things that I wrote about in this book, Equity and Excellence, that I think are really important and really resonates with teachers around the country that are talking to me about how frankly overwhelmed they are. Focus says that we can't get to about more than about 6 initiatives at any one time. And friends, if you conduct an initiative inventory, then you'll find that you've got a lot more than 6 priorities going on, sometimes duplicative. This is particularly important right now in the summer of 2020 as some of the CARES fund comes in. I'm desperately concerned that just as has happened in the past, some of you remember Race to the Top and other grant funds, those CARE funds come in, the vendors are hot on your trail, and they're saying, buy this program, buy that program. If you want me to synthesize 20 years of research on success in schools, it's the following: practices, not programs. It's not what you buy, it's what you do. It's not what you buy in the short term that is going to evaporate in 3 years. It's the capacity that you build with your educators and your school leaders. Practices, not programs, and focus on a few things. Instructional effectiveness. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you, also free, is the mini observation rubric from Kim Marshall. Go to Marshall Memo, that's 2 L's, marshallmemo.com, and you'll find the mini observation rubrics. 1 page for lesson planning, 1 page for classroom management, 1 page for feedback and assessment of students. In other words, that allows coaches and administrators to give highly differentiated feedback with a single page, not long-winded recitation and notes and reports that you have to write. They're just rubrics. Highlight what you see, don't highlight what you don't see, and that will save you time. We've done the same thing with leadership effectiveness. Again, free. The Leadership Performance Matrix, available at creativeleadership.net, based on a 37-state study that I did of how leadership performance assessment is largely broken in our country. The higher the rank, the more ambiguous and less helpful the leadership assessment is. This allows you, from the time of a developing leader all the way through your most veteran leaders at every level, to identify how do they build not only themselves, but their teams. And effective feedback, and that includes not only the day-to-day feedback that we provide, but also, of course, feedback in terms of grading and support to students, and efficacy. And I don't mean efficacy as some sort of jingle or some sort of song and dance routine. I mean real efficacy, the bone deep belief that we influence student achievement. That's what I tried to describe in this book, Equity and Excellence. Next slide.
Leadership is focused teaching, and leadership is loading. And ladies and gentlemen, again, I apologize. We've gotten reports that GoToWebinar is bogging down today. So hopefully that'll load for you in just a sec. There we go.
So if you could take away one big idea from today's webinar, it's the following: power standards. You know, and I know that well before COVID-19 struck, there were too many standards. All of our standards across the United States and internationally, whether they're provincial standards in Canada, whether they're national standards in Singapore, are all based upon 1 year of learning. And yet many of you have got students who needed more than 1 year of learning back in the fall of 2019. Now that we've missed 3 months of regular school, another 3 months this summer, you're going to have students coming to you in the fall of 2020 who need more than a year of learning, and yet they're expected to cover an entire new year for the 2021 school year. You can't do it. And the only responsible thing is to articulate power standards. Now, to be fair, I don't think states and provinces are going to do that, because standard setting at that level is a political idea. It's something that's done with the process of accumulation over the course of time. And so we have to make sure that real power standards are based upon the 3 components of leverage. That is, what influences multiple levels of learning and multiple subjects. For example, nonfiction writing influences mathematics and science and reading comprehension and social studies. What has endurance? That is, if you look at argumentative writing, it happens in 4th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade. What is essential? I'm encouraging every 5th grade teacher listening today to buy a piece of virtual pizza for a 6th grade teacher and ask, if I give you this piece of virtual pizza, tell me, what do I need to do? What are the knowledge and skills that my students need this year so that I can send kids to you next year with confidence and success? You want to know what that 6th grade teacher never says to a 5th grade teacher? You better cover every single element of every single 5th grade standard. They give them a list that is brief and focused. 8th grade teachers, buy a 9th grade teacher some virtual pizza and ask, what do I need to do this year to send kids to you next year with confidence and success? They never say cover everything. Use those principles of leverage, endurance, essentiality. That will get you down to a handful of standards, not frantically playing whack-a-mole trying to cover them all. We have to address initiative fatigue. In my research, the rule of 6 is quite clear. More than 2,000 schools that I studied, you get more than 6 initiatives, you might as well have none. And what we need to do is, because our budgets are going to get cut, save money by not spending money on things that people aren't using. Every time I conduct an impact insight inventory, what I do is I just take an inventory of every initiative in the district. It's always longer than you think. And then I ask, what's actually being used? We have 4 levels of use. What's actually being used? Go back to the earlier slide. What's actually being used? At level 1, the stuff was delivered. At level 2, maybe it was delivered and we had things that were trained. Level 3, there's actually evidence of impact on student performance. And in level 4, there's evidence that we're sharing that with other classrooms and other schools. I find a ton of stuff that's at level 1, delivered, but never used in the classroom. The best budget cut you'll ever make is cutting things that people are not even using. And that's what the Impact Insight Inventory will do for you. Next slide. So let's talk about feedback. The best evidence that I can offer you for feedback is fast, fair, accurate, specific, and timely. By fairness, all I mean is consistency. And that means that everybody agrees on what the word proficient means. A great use of PLC meeting time is to look at an anonymous piece of student work and say, does this meet 3rd grade standards? Does this math problem solving, this science lab report, this essay really meet our standards or not? And if we don't agree on what the rules of the game are, if we don't as adults agree on what proficiency is, how in the world does a 3rd grader figure it out? So we've got to be willing to be fair, that is consistent. It's got to be accurate. Are we grading what we think we're grading? This is particularly true in COVID-19. Am I really grading student proficiency, or am I grading student access to computers? Am I really grading student proficiency, or am I grading the degree of parental assistance that they get? Accuracy means I grade what I think I'm grading. It's got to be specific. Let our music teachers and our athletic coaches be our guides here. Very specific feedback on exactly what we need to do to improve performance. Not just wrong answer, do it again, but exactly how to improve my work. And it's got to be timely. We can't wait for the end of the semester or marking period, even for the end of the week or month. But like music teachers and athletic coaches do, every single day, every minute within the day, let me know how to get better and better and better. Next slide.
And Doug, as we transition, a question from Justin came in. He wants to know your sense of the likelihood of the pressure of state testing returning in 2021. He says that he has students learning remotely, but he can't guarantee they'll pass a Park-style test.
I think that the chances of rationality at the policymaker level are approximately 0. And by that, I mean we will continue to have tests, and they'll continue to be used sometimes to club public education. That said, let me tell you, anger is not a strategy. So let's just be frank with each other about how we deal with that. We are going to have tests in the spring of 2021. We are not going to be able to prepare for every single thing that might come up. So this is a case of having why we have to have power standards. And power standards mean that we're not going to cover every standard, focus on those that are most important. And we've got to have real honest conversations with our teachers and union leaders on this, that we're not going to hold them accountable if they didn't cover the rhombus. If they covered the power standards, that's what's most important. Don't send the message to teachers that they frantically have to cover everything. And Tony, please do mute yourself when you're not speaking. Okay, now let's talk about planning for differentiation. What we can do right now is to get a reading level, a writing sample for every student. If your schools have already closed for this year, I'll tell you what we can do. We can not let the sun set on the first week of class in the fall of 2020 without getting a reading level and a writing sample. And you can combine those into one, a 20-minute written response to text, appropriate grade level text for every single student. Get a simple math level, 12 items, 20 minutes for every single student. If you'll invest time in that first week of school with a reading level, writing sample, and math level for every student, you'll save yourself time for the next 35 weeks of class by planning for differentiation right up front and not learning 9 weeks later that you've got a problem because students were failing. We got to provide resources right now. Our technology and real book resources need to be distributed to students. And I'll tell you what, I heard a brilliant idea from my friends in Newark today, is that they did a quick technology assessment for every teacher to say, hey, do we know how to use breakout groups? Do we know how to deal with questions? Do we know how to deal with handholding or without handholding, call on students randomly? This brilliant set of technology assessments allows us to invest time this summer practicing differentiation, not just for students, but for us, differentiated professional learning for making maximum use of professional learning for all of our teachers and administrators as well. And of course, we need to make pre-assessment part of every single lesson. Don't start a lesson without finding, are my students ready for this? I've seen teachers waste time on ratio and scale lessons that they could have saved if they would have found out that kids didn't know fractions beforehand. Do pre-assessment first, just 3 or 4 minutes to save you time that might be otherwise misallocated. Next slide, please. Let's learn from our special educators. Man, they are so brilliant at this. Here's what I've learned from my special ed friends. I'll think something is one task, and they'll say, no, Doug, for my students, it's actually 4 or 5 tasks. Break it down, and if you break it down to those 4 tasks, then you can maintain the same rigor, but identify precisely along the way where students need help and where they don't. And as I reflected on that, I thought, wait a minute, that's not special ed, that's good ed. That's what we all ought to be doing, applying those lessons of special education everywhere. Moreover, a lot of the things that our special educators use in terms of adaptations and accommodations really apply to all of us when it comes to using technology, when it comes to having things read, when it comes to maybe outlining things first. There's lots of very clever adaptations and accommodations they use that I think could also be used in a regular ed classroom. Next slide. Let's think about professional learning. I'm worried that a lot of this time that's really precious for our leaders and for our teachers is not invested wisely. So we do need special support for new teachers. Most of all, that's our biggest priority. Think of that. New teachers have a hard enough time. But if you were a new teacher in the fall of 2020 who was expecting to have your field experience in the spring of 2020, and that field experience involved nothing except computer-based learning, you've never managed a classroom, you've never spoken to a parent, you've never dealt with a child having a meltdown, then you're going to need support in the in the spring of in the fall of 2020. I would advocate for co-teaching and day-to-day support by veteran teachers with those new teachers. It's going to be a real crisis if they've been in a classroom and never had field experience. They need specific and incremental feedback. And remember, the Marshall Memo rubrics, those mini observation rubrics, are a goldmine of support, not just for new teachers, but for all of us. They need to systematically gather student work and evaluate them comparatively. It's a key PLC practice to say, is what I am calling proficient what my colleagues in the same grade level, same subject are calling proficient. And we need to make sure that when we present data in our professional learning conferences, it's constructive and not judgmental. It's just like gravity. Data just is. It's not something that's good or bad or terrible or not, reflecting on my professionalism or not. It's just the truth. It's like taking temperature. And now that we know what the temperature is, then let's respond to it. That's the way, non-judgmentally, that we have to look at data. Next slide. So let's talk about essential changes. This is probably the most volatile and emotional subject in education these days, but we just got to approach this anyway because it'll save you a lot of grief in the summer and next year. A lot of you want to do standards-based grading. God bless you for that. But I've seen too many superintendents get fired and too many board elections turn on standards-based grading gone wrong. So let's keep it simple. You can do standards-based grading, that is, evaluating students compared to a standard, not compared to a bell curve. That's the essence of standards-based grading, and still keep A, B, C, D, F grading. A lot of people are engaging in the wrong battle. They want to get rid of A, B, C, D, F grading and use language of standards. I understand that, but I think you're just looking for a fight that you don't need to have. You can still, if your community wants A, B, C, D, F grading, 3.7, 3.6, 4.0 kind of grading, you can do that and still have standards-based grading, as long as you make a pledge that you're evaluating student compared to a standard and not to each other. That means, for example, that an A really is a 4, a B is a 3, a C is a 2, a D is a 1, and F is a 0, and you get rid of the average. You evaluate based on proficiency, and you get rid of the 100-point scale. The key thing is getting rid of the average and getting rid of the 100 points, and you can still keep A, B, C, D, F grading. Use the latest and best evidence to define what students need, not the average, and that way you'll reinforce student work ethic, perseverance, resilience, all the things that parents say that they want and that we as educators want. Go to the Latin honor system of highest honors, high honors, high honors. And this is a way of empowering your secondary faculty to say, hey, getting a 4.0 isn't enough. And we're also not going to have the nonsense of a 3.99994 beats a 3.99993, when the difference between those two might be who didn't have to have a summer job and got some extra college credits with quality points. That's dumb. Just have high honors, and honors, and trust your teachers to say, if we're going to say 3.9 and higher means highest honors, plus, by the way, scholarship and integrity and service, then that's what it means. If all you do is have a 4.0, but you don't have integrity and service, you're not getting highest honors. And if you want to say that high honors is 3.7 and 3.8, then that's what it means, plus integrity and service, and so on. In other words, you may have some years where nobody has highest honors. You may have some years where 5 students have highest honors. But we stop this nonsense of saying the 3.99993 is different from a 3.99994. Next slide. The elements of feedback are fair, accurate, specific, and timely. And fairness is all about consistency. That means whether we're looking at a second grade piece of writing or a senior thesis, we're all agreeing about what the word proficient means. Accurate means I'm grading on what the student really did, not their wealth, not their family status, not their access to technology, but their real proficiency. Specific and timely means that I'm understanding the purpose of feedback is to improve their performance, just like music teachers and coaches do. They don't give feedback 9 weeks later. They give feedback immediately so that students get better. And I want my math class to be as good as that music teacher and coaches classes where students get immediate feedback that's so specific that they can use it to get better all the time. Next slide.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're transitioning to another interaction opportunity. If you had trouble previously, one of our participants indicated that you might need to text leave to a previous poll. You may be in someone else's poll. If you have already joined 22333 and were able to respond last time, you are good to go. If you need to join, please text to 22333. The message creative lead, hit send, and you should receive confirmation. And our poll question now, ladies and gentlemen, is which of the 7 practices that Dr. Reeves just discussed are you most likely to implement? And we'll give you about 30 more seconds to send those replies in. Thank you for those that are sending them in. We appreciate the response. Doug, looks like feedback is holding a strong lead.
And I will just tell you, colleagues, that what you're saying here, it's not like it's a zero-sum game. I hope you'll consider doing all of these, but I think your emphasis on feedback is thoughtfully placed. John Hattie says that feedback is the most powerful tool in the teacher's toolbox. And I think he's right about that, provided that the feedback is accurate, specific, and timely. Let's go on to the next slide. You know, the shutdown has been pretty rough on all of us, psychologically, medically, emotionally. But I think we've learned a few lessons, and I don't want this shutdown to end without learning some of those lessons. Number one, let us not fill in silence with our worst fears. I'm seeing great examples of teachers saying, okay, they didn't log on, let's call them. They didn't respond to a call, let's send them an old-fashioned letter. Didn't respond to the letter, let's, in addition to calls, letters, and logons, send somebody to their sidewalk. And administrators, please don't place this in the back of teachers alone. The really well-functioning schools that I'm seeing engage every single person. Anybody who's cashing a paycheck, a paraprofessional, an admin person, security person, everybody who's cashing a paycheck has a role to play in making calls, making contact, making home visits where necessary to make sure that we get people engaged. We know that these personal relationships between teachers and students are more important now than ever. And I'm hearing wonderful stories of students literally holding the picture of a teacher while they speak to them on the telephone call. And another lesson that I've learned is that teachers are really narrowing the focus. Instead of the traditional 30 or 40 item assessment, they're giving 2 and 3 item assessments. I've heard teachers complain, well, once the class is over, they just disappear and I never hear from them. And I said, well, what would you do if this were in your regular classroom? And they said, I'd stand over them until they got it done. Let's do that now. In other words, don't let them sign off because, well, now I've got to do a 30-item homework assignment. I want you to do 2 or 3 items and do them right now while I watch. Maybe with the whole class, maybe with one student. But that highly focused assessment with immediate feedback is some of the best skill that we can offer to our students. Next slide. You know, one of the things that I worry about is this almost learned helplessness of students. We're conveying them that they're just helpless victims here, when in fact a key to emotional health is empowering students, letting them know that they're people of purpose and meaning and agency. They're not helpless victims. So some examples of things, and here's where your arts teachers can really step up. I've seen wonderful examples of poetry slams, of musical groups, of students doing their own museums online to share with the entire community, a story time in different languages, by the way, that they're providing for primary age students, checking in on elders. I'm sure you could brainstorm with the help of your students many other ideas. But the key here is don't just let them feel like victims. We need them. Our country needs them. And they are key to their emotional health is to have them have a sense of meaning and purpose during this crisis. Next slide, please. How about homework menus? Teachers are really, really frustrated about kids not doing homework. And so before we go to one extreme or the other, here's what I want to suggest. The reason that we assign homework is that kids need practice. Practice is best done with a coach present. And so to the extent that you want students to practice something, have them do that practice during class while you're watching. Stop expecting the odd-numbered problems, 30 problems to be done alone. However, I can hear what you're saying. What if our parents demand homework? Great. Let us collect homework menus with the insights that you and many of your colleagues have got. For example, kids need work on measurement and on fractions. Here's your assignment, at least from the menu. Help a parent make a meal by doubling, halving, tripling recipes. If you have adolescents in town, maybe quadrupling recipes. Help them learn about fractions, decimals, and measurement. Have them conduct interviews and create a family history. We know that nonfiction writing, one of the best things that they can do, and interview elders. Have them create a neighborhood newspaper. I've done that at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. It's great. Students are motivated by being famous, and they will do more drafts of a newspaper article that's going to get published, and grandparents will see it than they'll ever do for me, where they'll maybe do one more draft. Newspapers are a great way to motivate and engage students. And of course, read alouds. Read aloud while parents are doing something else every single night, 20 minutes a night at least. I used to say 20 minutes is required for every single student. Maybe this summer we ought to think about 40 minutes, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon or evening. But we need students to read aloud, not just go home and read silently or fill out a reading log that they said they read and they may or may not have read. I'm sure you can think of other things, but that's what a good homework menu does. It's not just the odd numbered problems 1 through 30 where maybe they did it, maybe they didn't. Next slide. One of the best ideas I've heard from teachers is what they're calling on-call academic content. What about these students who don't log on or can't log on? Teachers are also finding out that they're not going to listen to a 35 or 40-minute or 60-minute lecture. What they will do is very short, 3 to 5 minute presentations on a single concept. Here's how to do a one variable equation. Here's how to plot points on a coordinate grid. Here's how to identify a great topic sentence. Here's how to read a map. I defer to you on what it is, but it's very short, 3 to 5 minutes. Students can play these and review them at their own pace. They can ask questions that are very specific, way better than trying to put 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes of content onto a video. Next slide.
Doug, as we transition, a question from Michael came in. In our district, we grade a final course grade using 4 quarters and a midterm and final exam in the following way: 20% to each quarter, 10% to each exam. Would you recommend not using the average and grading more on what students have done lately while still sticking to a similar grading policy?
I emphatically do not recommend the use of the average. I know that what you just described is common. I think it is deeply wrong, and here's why I think it's wrong. You and I have all, I hope, had the experience of a student who struggled early in a year and then finally got it. They were engaged, they were energized, they demonstrated proficiency. It's not a nice linear curve. It's this curve that goes like this. And we want to praise those breakthrough points. And if they had a breakthrough, then they deserve to be evaluated at the end of the year for that breakthrough, not punishing them in May and June for the mistakes that they made in September and October. That is especially true now when we had students in February, in March, in April, and May with highly varying degrees of access to the material at hand. So I am deeply, unequivocally against using all the grades in an equal fashion as you've described. I think what we need to do is to use the latest and best evidence. Every state in the United States says that they evaluate students based on standards. If we really believe in that, then we have a clear understanding of the standards we wanted them to achieve, and we evaluate them based upon the achievement or lack of achievement of those standards, not at this accumulation of points during the year. I can't give an inch on this. It's deeply wrong. And I will tell you that when teachers have changed to evaluating learning instead of points, they've said the conversations with students change. It changes from an accounting drill. Gee, mister, how many extra points do I need to do to move from a C to a B, to a conversation about learning. What do we need to learn to demonstrate that I can do this?
And 2 other questions, Doug. One from Ava: can the Latin honors system you recommended be implemented without changing the grade scale from average to proficiency? In other words, could districts use the average scale and add other criteria based on highest honors, high honors, and recognize scholarship, integrity, and service?
Absolutely, yes. For example, if you use standards language like proficient and exemplary, and you want to say that highest honors means exemplary plus integrity and service, you can say that. If honors means proficient with service and integrity, I think that's a faculty decision. I totally defer to you. But what I know it doesn't do is to say a 4.1 is different from a 4.15, or that a 98 is different from a 97.9. That's the virtue of the Latin honor system, is that it is objective and does not have these meaningless distinctions of 1/10 of 1 decimal point.
And question from Lisa: what do you think of the idea of a flipped classroom to engage students that we don't know when they come to a remote classroom in September?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teachers have been doing this for a long time. And just to clarify, I think what you mean by flipped classroom is that I've prepared these mini content delivery in videos beforehand, and I devote my interactive class time to discussion, to questions, to inquiry, not to mere presentation. I think that is a great idea, and what I've heard more and more effective teachers do during COVID-19. Your time with students is too precious to spend it on lecturing. Get your content delivery in very short bursts, as I said earlier, 3 to 5 minutes on very specific concepts, and use the classroom time that we have, whether it's virtual or live, for interactive inquiry and discussion and challenge.
All right, thank you. And your slide's up.
So that's a great segue into meaningful checks for understanding. Friends, you know and I know that only novices say, everybody with me, or anybody got any questions? The people on this webinar, experienced, professional, thoughtful educators, never say that. They instead make sure that we ask meaningful checks for understanding. That's the best way to use classroom time. And I'll tell you, teachers are frustrated around the country. And it wasn't just COVID-19. They were frustrated beforehand with kids copying, with cheating, and a growing number of students are engaged in this kind of activity. Now, the answer is not anger. The answer is a meaningful check for understanding. And let me illustrate with a couple of examples. Next slide. When a student submits a paper, I'm not going to just accept the paper and lose my weekend and evening grading it. I'm going to stay and said, hey, Jerome, and I'm going to randomly call on him. Remember, not going to wait for hands up. I'm randomly calling on him with equity sticks, just like my primary grade students do. But now I'm in maybe a junior or senior high school ELA class where they submitted a piece of work. Jerome, I really appreciated the work that you cited, but I need to know some sources that you didn't cite. Why is a source that you cited more credible than the one that you did not cite? Now, if Jerome copied that paper, he is going to be stuck and cannot answer that. This is a deep check for understanding and one that's really worth investing time. Now, you can't do that, I know, with 150 kids, but if you'll call on students randomly, do it 5 per class period, everybody knows that they might be called on. They better be ready to defend their answers. Next slide. Well, in this math assignment, Christina, I really appreciated that you got the right answer. And so that's clear to everybody. You got the right answer. But what I don't follow, Christina, is how you got from step 2 to step 3. Can you explain that to me? If the right answer was simply copied, they'll never be able to do that. A meaningful check for understanding really gets to the essence of what teaching and learning is all about, and frankly smokes out people who have simply copied the answer. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but I am trying to maintain the rigor and the high standards that I know all of you expect. Next slide. Wellness checks. Our primary age students are used to circles, and our primary age teachers do this brilliantly. But for some reason, we stopped doing that for older students. I guess because wellness doesn't matter for adolescents. I mean, come on. Let's learn from our elementary colleagues. We can do a wellness check either virtually or physically in our classrooms. And it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. We can have students introduce themselves to each other. We can call on half a dozen of them to ask a question of the colleague, maybe that they just knew their name for the first time, and ask them about a weekend, ask them about a sibling, ask them about a pet, ask them about something that they love. Just to do that quick wellness check for 5 minutes at the beginning of a class makes the rest of the class go much better. For those of you doing professional learning communities, I know you're used to asking the 4 questions. What do we want students to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they already have? How about question 0? Question 0 is, what do we need to do to support students to get learning effective this week? What are the mental, emotional, physical, and medical supports that they need right now before the learning starts? This is, as we all know, Maslow before Bloom. We've got to check in on their wellness first. That's question 0 of a PLC. Next slide.
And Doug, Gigi asked if you could repeat the information for online FaceTime. I don't recall the context of that, so do you recall?
Yeah, I'm just saying that for these effective checks for understanding, what I'm asking for is don't wait for hands raised. You know who's in your class, whether it's whatever technology you're using, and call on them randomly and ask them to explain the paper, explain the sources, explain how they got the answers and the steps. That's all I'm saying.
And a question from Ellie as we transition to the next slide. How do we balance meaningful checks and not singling out a student?
Well, here's the answer. You're not singling them out if it's genuinely random. That's why I think our kindergarten and first grade teachers do this brilliantly. They're visibly, and you can do this virtually as well, shaking all the sticks in a box and pulling one out. They don't know who it is. And Ramona, you're up. Raul, you're up. It's all random. Nobody's being singled out. And I know that the boys in the back row with their head in the desk, either virtually or physically, would much rather not be called on. But you're working too hard, colleagues, to let that happen. Don't let them check out. When you use random calls, nobody has the option to check out. And our elementary colleagues do it brilliantly. We can as well. I know college professors who are doing this. And I can flat tell you from interviewing college students and high school students, the kids don't like it. They'd much rather let the kids in the front row with their hands raised answer all the questions and do all the heavy lifting. Don't let that happen. Use random calls. And I do it with a sense of humor. I'm not trying to put anybody in the spot, but I want 100% engagement in my class. And that's what you know you're going to get. So let's talk about time and project management. A real advantage that has happened during this virtual learning time is that we can really help students learn one of the most important skills as they go not only in the K-12 environment, but also beyond to post-secondary education. And that is, how do you take a big project, break it down into smaller increments? And that is, for elementary kids, it might be just 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe for middle schools, it's 15 minutes. But all those tasks are really short increments. For bigger tasks, then it might be several tasks in a row. And if I'll take those big projects, those big term papers, those big dioramas, whatever it happens to be, and break it down into little tasks of a few minutes each, I'm helping students gain the skill of time and project management, and I'm giving myself as the teacher the opportunity to provide feedback on a bit-by-bit basis. It's good for us, and it's good for our students, and it avoids the crises of a Sunday night run to Office Max. Next slide. Here's my best idea. It's the egg timer. It means instead of the classical classroom presentation, where the students all take notes dutifully and they have the illusion of paying attention because they're all writing down whatever on the board, instead, very fast paced. 3 minutes concept, 3-minute breakout, 3-minute whole class review, rinse, wash, repeat. In 9 minutes, I've had 3 very short bursts of concept, breakout, whole class. And if I do that 5 times, I've got I've got these 5 concepts presented in these 9-minute bursts in a 45-minute classroom. Man, it makes it go past like lightning. Good for us, very high energy, great for kids, and avoids the doldrum of the kids pretending that they're engaged when, for all we know, they're writing cartoons in their notebooks. Or just as bad, having us think that they're paying attention because the notebooks are filled out merely because they copied what was in the board, not because they really understood anything. This rapid fire egg timer approach, 3 minutes, ding, now small groups, 3 minutes, ding, now whole class, now let's go to the next concept, will really energize your class periods. Next slide.
And Doug, 2 questions as we transition. In high school from Martha, how might we provide the feeling of group bonding while using video conferencing, but not have it get out of control?
Yeah, one of the best things that I've seen are tech buddies. And I realize we do want group bonding, but I think it's really hard to contrive social relationships. But I think what really is good is to let students post, and there's different sorts of technology that you can do this, either on anonymous boards or on boards that identify them, post help questions. And students love being both helpers, and they love having access to help that doesn't require me to tell Martha as my teacher what I don't know. I'll tell my buddy what I don't know. I don't want to tell Martha what I don't know. And so creating post-it boards for us to be able to ask and answer questions builds solid social relationships, and also let students answer the question they always ask in high school: what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? Now, honestly, tech questions may be part of that. I've also seen, and you got to kind of keep an eye on this, social advice boards, question and answer boards, advice about parents boards, but that sort of thing really does build camaraderie. And I think it's a great way to have kids engage with one another in a thoughtful, appropriate basis.
All right, and Erin sent in a suggestion that she is using as a way to check in with students. We have students either stay on the Google Meet during their work time and the teacher checks in with each of them individually, or students check out when finished and the teacher asks questions for understanding, provides help, reassurance, accolades, etc.
Thanks, Erin. I really appreciate that thoughtful advice, and let us all remember the value of that one-to-one connection. I know, particularly in secondary school, when you're overwhelmed with so many students, it's hard to do, but it's not impossible. One-to-one connections can really be the source of keeping students engaged when they might otherwise become disengaged. Let me say a few things about the first week of school in 2020. We're coming close to running out of time, and I want to respect your time as well, remembering that if your question doesn't get answered now, I've made my personal contact information available, and I'm happy to dialogue with you individually. Moreover, I'm happy to do this presentation just for your district or just for your region or state. If that would be helpful to you, they are all free. So for the first week of school in the fall of 2020, let's make sure if we haven't got them already, a reading and a writing level immediately. Just 20 minutes, not a big long assessment, 20 minutes with a reading passage, grade level appropriate, and a written response to that passage. What was the character like? What do you think is going to happen next? What was the setting? Can be very simple and age appropriate questions, but you got to have a reading level and a writing level first week of school. Really simple math level, just number operations, 12 questions, again, 20 minutes, find out where they are. It'll save you a ton of time and set you up for differentiation. Remember question 0 for PLC meetings. Before you ask, what do we want them to learn? Ask, what are the emotional, mental, medical, physical supports that they need? If you've got students in need of shelter, in need of meals, in need of social care, we've got to make sure that we provide that and we know what's up. And of course, personal meetings, including home visits, are some of the most important things that we can do. That's what we did for chronic absenteeism in the past. In the first week of fall, we'd say, hey, who was chronically absent last year? Let's meet with their parents before it's a problem. Who got suspended last year? Let's meet with the family before it's a problem. Friends, I especially want to ask you to do that in the first week of the 2020 school year, 2021 school year. Next slide. For this class, make sure that we have intensive in-class support, observation, and feedback for our new teachers. I'm grievously worried about our new teachers who have never had any field work, any realistic student-teacher experience. They need you every day, not just to evaluate them at the end of a term. We need intensive PLC coaching. I've had the pleasure of spending time with PLC meetings and collaborative teams, not to facilitate them, but to simply watch them and notice what they're doing and what they're not getting to and providing feedback. I think given the amount of time and frankly resources that you spend on PLC meetings, it's worthwhile having PLC coaching to make sure that they really invest those resources wisely and implement improved grading systems. If you want to have one big lever to improve achievement, improve engagement this year, it's to get rid of the average and have meaningful grading systems that will really give your students the perseverance and resilience that they need. Next slide.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw our session to a close, we thank you for joining us today, and we'd like to close with a final poll. Again, the directions on the screen: 22333 is the recipient, Creative Lead 764. If you have not joined, our closing question for today, as we look ahead to the 2020-2021 school year, what is your greatest hope for the year? Please use one word in your response. We'll give you about a minute to send those in. And as they're coming in, several of you have asked whether this webinar has been recorded, and it has. Typically takes about 36 hours to process the recording, and it will be posted to our website and available for download after that point. Doug, a few others rolling in the question feature: success, safety, unity, health.
Well, thanks, everybody. Let me just give a particular shout out to those of you who are talking about health. You're not being selfish. I worry about the news stories about the heroic teachers up at midnight, up at 5 a.m., losing their weekends, sacrificing everything for their students. You know, God love you. I appreciate that. But let me say something seriously to the administrators on this webinar. Heroism is not a sustainable strategy. And if we make the price of entry into our profession losing family time, losing your health, we're not going to keep the great teachers that we have. So we've got to make sure it is okay to have DND, do not disturb, on that cell phone after hours, and especially during the nighttime. They got to get their sleep. I watch the timestamps on emails you send to me, and they're 11 o'clock at night and they're 5 o'clock in the morning. Friends, it's not healthy. You can't help students if you lose your own health. So seriously, you're not being selfish when you say, I need family dinner time, I need workout time, I need walking time. Take care of yourselves. That's not selfish. That's appropriate and good modeling for your students, and especially for our younger faculty who are joining us as well. I want you all to have long and happy lives and stay in our profession for as long as you can. I also want to welcome continued discussion. As I said, we're willing to do these presentations and support for districts, for regions. We have educational service centers in some states, BOCES in other states. Whatever the terminology that you use for regions that serve rural areas, that's fine. Same for states. We've had entire states pitch in on these things, and we just are here to support you. They are all free, and you can count on us as your partner as we go through these days ahead. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your week.